welcome to Things Are Getting Strange, the X-Files Rewatch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's 2023. Genuinely this time, we're not us recording in advance.
The year that Scully will become the director of the FBI.
Yeah. Let's see if it happens.
And the 30th anniversary of the show, of course.
And the 30th anniversary of the show, yeah. Exciting. Although, I don't think we've got any news again as normal, other than it's the anniversary.
Hooray!
No news?
Over on the Twitter and Mastodon in particular, we are preparing for next week's show, so when we're going to be discussing the other Mere Flask, the final episode.
Ooh.
So I've been asking people to tell me what their top 5 episodes are for this season. I might later in the week start asking you for what your least favourite episodes are as well, just to balance it out. But if you want to join in the debate, there's still a bit more time to give your 2 cents in on that. As I say, I want to know what your top 5 best episodes of season 1 of The X-Files are. Nick and I will also be putting in our kind of opinions as well on the show, so we can just see if our favourites match yours.
Yeah, I have a thinking suspicion based on what you've got back so far that everyone is going to be more or less the same on these ones.
There's some variants.
There is some
There's
variance.
some outlayers that you might not have thought of.
But for the most part, it's the same 5 episodes, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd go there's probably about 8 episodes that are coming up time and time again.
Okay.
And some that are, of course, common to everybody because we all know what the best episode is.
Well, yes, it's very hard to ignore that one. Okay, so I think in absence of any other news, we should probably get to our episodes. So the lead, the young character in Born Again, our first episode, Michelle. How would you describe her?
She has the cold dead eyes of a killer.
Cool, hang on to that. So, first up, we watched Born Again, which was first broadcast on the 29th of April 1994. It's directed by Gerald Freeman and written, as if we couldn't guess, by Alex Ganzer and Howard Gordon. I feel we're kind of picking on these two, but they are producing some of the worst episodes.
Aren't they the guys who wrote Shadows?
Yes, they did write Shadows. So our guest stars. The most obvious one is Maggie Wheeler, who played Detective Sharon Lazard. Best known for Seinfeld, where she played Cynthia, who was a woman that George was set up one time.
Okay.
She's the one who had the luscious hair that he could get his hand stuck in.
Oh, yes, yes.
But she was also Janice in Friends, which I think is what most people would remember her for.
I believe at the time this episode was made, she was also David Duchovny's girlfriend.
Ah, yes. So we also have Day Young, who played Judy Bishop, who is Michelle Bishop's mother. She's been in 3 Star Trek series, being in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Enterprise. She was also a waitress in Spaceballs. and I like this one, a professional sculptor.
Oh.
Who works in clay and bronze.
That's interesting.
So anyway, Michelle Bishop was played by Andrea Libman, who has an interesting career in terms of things you'll have seen.
Was it before or after the X-Files?
After the X-Files.
Okay.
Okay. So she went on to be in Dora the Explorer as Glowy Star. She was in DuckTales as Bramble. And she's Pinkie Pie. And Fluttershy. Cold Dead Eyes of the Killer, huh?
That's somewhat appropriate for
Pinkie Pie, yeah, admittedly, that's true. But yeah, that's her.
Oh, that's cool. So she's gone into voice acting then?
She's primarily a voice actor now. She does a whole swath of animation and some video games and other bits and pieces. The only thing she's really done as live action now are My Little Pony-centric stuff.
Okay.
Because they get interviewed for the documentaries and things.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we also have Mimi Lieber, who played Anita Fiore, who was also in Seinfeld. I can't remember who this was. She was Ruler.
Okay.
Peelin Johnson, who played Dr. Sheila Braun, who was the psychiatrist, will show up twice more in The X-Files. First in Dehanna D. Villettes as Deborah Brown.
Okay.
And then as a doctor in Small Potatoes.
Ah.
Okay, so Born Again. Detective Sharon Lazard finds a seemingly lost girl and takes her inside her precinct to be interviewed. Moments later, the interviewer, Babala, is thrown out of the window. Mulder and Scully are called in with reference to the Toombs case. Michelle gives a description of the man she says who attacked Babala, but when making a photo fit, the system seems to glitch and then shows the face of the alleged killer without seeming user input. The killer is Charlie Morris, who died over 9 years ago in a gangland hit. Mulder talks to Michelle's psychiatrist, who shows him mutilated dolls. The injuries depicted on the dolls match Charlie Morris's at the time of his death. Michelle also throws an origami hawk at Mulder. Mulder and Scully interview Charlie Morris's ex-partner, Tony Fiore. After this, he meets with Leon Felder, and they discuss money in a safety deposit box, and they have agreed to leave it alone for 10 years. And they are the last two claimants on the money. Later that night, Felder gets off a bus, but his scarf is caught in the door via an invisible force. The bus refuses to brake and kills Felder. Michelle is inexplicably inside the bus, looking on with, as Skin would say, the cold dead eyes of a killer. Mulder and Scully find Babale, Charlie Morris, Fiore, and Felder all used to work together in the past. And Fiore's wife, Anita, used to be Charlie's. Anita has kept a collection of origami animals made by Charlie, all representing animals in Noah's Ark. Michelle is given a hypnosis and claims to be 24 years old and starts screaming about someone trying to kill her. Mulder concludes she is Charlie Morris's reincarnation. The videotape from the hypnosis contains a moment of static before Michelle started screaming. Computer enhancement shows it to be of a deep-sea diver. Scully simultaneously finds out that Charlie Morris died due to salt water in his lungs, and the conclusion is drawn that he in fact died in his fish tank, where the deep-sea diver is currently still sat. Mulder and Scully find Michelle using telekinetic powers to try and kill Fiore. Fiore confesses to the plot and how Charlie Morris found out about the stolen money. Michelle then explodes the fish tank using her powers, but relents and does not kill Fiore, who then pleads guilty. Michelle seemingly fully recovers from the ordeal and shows no signs of any further possession by Charlie Morris. It's very...
Shadows.
Shadows, okay, so yes.
That's why I was so sure that it was written by the same guy as Shadows.
Yeah, I can see that, and it's very, very... I don't know.
I'll go twofold, actually. It's Shadows crossed with Lazarus, because you've got more... He's not a poltergeist, it's the soul transference idea from Lazarus.
Yeah. It's like Shapes to a degree. There's no surprises, is there? We know what the deal with Michelle is from, like, the word go.
Do you, though?
Well, again, it's the whole, she's got the cold dead eyes as a killer, and the whole, when she's just...
Well, you know she's an evil child, but...
Okay, yeah,
X-Files used evil childs for Eve and things like that, and that wasn't a possession plot.
That's true. Okay, so we don't know who's possession yet, but it's still, the child is definitely the culprit.
Not possession, we've got to get there. She's a reincarnation. It's soul transference, it's not possession.
It's really odd having Swamp paired with Roland, because we're getting to a very similar thing, but Roland does it better.
Roland does, but Roland is possession.
Yeah.
Whereas this is soul transference.
But it's not permanent, though, so it's a whole... Michelle is a reincarnation of Charlie, but then it evaporates.
I'm skipping ahead, but I thought that was kind of unbelievable for the end as well. As
yeah.
if it's not possession, it is reincarnation. The fact that she stops being Charlie after the end of the episode, after Fiore confesses.
Yeah, and she's just fine now, apparently, and can go swimming, because she used to be afraid of water. And, sorry, this was a reincarnation. She should still be Charlie Morris, even if she's no longer got fear of water, or she's, had her life goal fulfilled. But no, she's now Michelle, whoever Michelle is, because we don't actually know.
Michelle is Michelle.
Michelle is Michelle.
And no longer has the cold dead eyes of a killer.
Okay, so we'll go back to the start of the episode. I thought it was interesting that this case came to Mulder and Scully. Well, not only did they get there in apparently a fraction of time, because New York might be near Washington, D.C., but they've still got the street cordoned off by the time Mulder and Scully arrive. And that's a good few hours for them to get from Washington, D.C.
Maybe they weren't in D.C. Maybe they were in the presumably New York branch office at the time.
They might have been. But I did like the fact, though, that Lazard says that she called them in because of the Toombs case. They don't say which Toombs case. We've got to imagine really it's Squeeze rather than Toombs.
You're making an assumption, but Toombs was our last episode, so it could have just been that. We now know as well, because it mentions at one point in the episode that this is April, so very little time has actually passed from Beyond the Sea, which was set at Christmas.
That's true. I thought it would be Squeeze rather than Toombs, because in Squeeze, Mulder looks like a competent agent, and in Toombs, he looks like a psychotic nutter.
This is true.
And yeah, who are you going to get on your weird murder mystery thing? The guy who sort of got thrown out of a hearing for a psychiatric release? Or the man who successfully caught the serial killer breaking into someone else's house? Still, we've got Mulder is good with kids.
To a point.
Well, he's good with Michelle. He's like
to a point.
To a point, but like when he's doing the little joking around with the photo fit and giving the photo fit the ridiculous
The
moustaches.
Salvador Dali mustache.
Yeah, and she's enjoying that.
But on the other side, he shows absolutely no concern for her well-being when he emotionally scars her during the hypnosis session.
Very true. So basically, he's fine with them until they don't do what he wants them to do.
Mulder is, as always, preoccupied with getting the truth, and he will step on people to get that truth.
Yes.
Even 8-year-old girls.
Even 8-year-old girls. And it is... I think this episode also highlights that he really does believe in hypnosis, even when people around him are constantly trying to point out it has limitations, it has troublesome aspects to it.
I thought that was kind of interesting because a lot of what Mulder believes happened to Samantha we know is because of regression hypnosis.
Yeah.
And Mulder constantly has people telling him that it doesn't work, so it then kind of makes you doubt Mulder's experience as well. Is Mulder's recollection of what happened to Samantha actually accurate?
Yes. We do not know. But I liked the psychiatrist who talks to him about Michelle, shows him the damaged dolls, and then he starts bringing up past life experience or whatever he says to her, or regression hypnosis, and she immediately sort of says, I have another appointment.
We pointed this out last week, is that Mulder has no social skills whatsoever.
No, but he's fine talking to people, but actual social situations, he cannot do them.
I think it's, and I will get to it more in Roland, though, it's the fact that Mulder is very good at the interrogation part of his job, because that's his kind of background as a profiler. He's not good at other aspects of his job that kind of require finesse.
Yeah.
It's something we see in the end of Roland, so I'll get to that in a little while.
I've had an interesting point about the end of Roland, but yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that. The origami animals just don't really seem to be... I don't know, I felt there would be more to them than there is.
I thought it was curious, and I know you have to explain things for the audience, that origami was kind of treated as something rare and unusual.
It was really weird.
There's at least 2 different characters that explain what origami is over the course of the episode.
Was it that obscure in 1994?
I guess maybe... Well, it's kind of unusual for an 8-year-old to be able to do complex origami when she apparently hasn't been taught.
But simple origami is like a preschool kind of thing you do, isn't it?
I remember making birds in school,
Exactly.
certainly. So her throwing the hawk out the window wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility. But yeah, those little cranes that, I mean, I know how to make them because we learned how to do it in school and things like that.
They're very simple. But yeah, even though you've got the Noah's Ark thing, and I don't know, I thought that was going to go somewhere else. And we've got, as you said, the Blade Runner moment when she delivers the giraffe to complete the set.
I love it when she finds it on the doorstep. It's so much like the little unicorn in Blade Runner.
If only we made it out of silver foil just to really go on that whole little...
Unfortunately, it's made to look like a giraffe.
Yeah. And I don't know, it feels like a thread that was meant to do something else and it was kind of chopped down till it's barely in the episode again.
I presume it's just something quite distinct so you can make that connection that Charlie is Michelle and Michelle is Charlie.
Yeah, although it's Michelle's motivations at points, or Charlie's motivation at points, get a bit weird with the whole revenge killing. I get that.
They did get him killed.
Completing the origami animals feels kind of stepped down, and also the fact she killed all her fish at the end.
I thought it was kind of weird, the origami animals, because you can understand it being the connection to his wife is he told her he was going to finish this tableau of Noah's Ark and he was missing one animal. So Michelle, therefore, unfinished business, completed this for him. Yeah. But he doesn't really interact with his wife in any other way. There's no sense of longing, of loss, or anything like that, because Michelle, I don't think, ever even looks at the wife.
That's the problem, I think, then, is that, because admittedly you're going to get into some very weird, very creepy, very dodgy areas very quickly if you do that. But again, if you're passing off Michelle as Charlie... But at the same
time, it's not just that Charlie has died and left his wife, who he presumably loved. It's that one of his killers is now married to the wife.
Yeah. It feels kind of not formed right, doesn't it?
Yeah, if I was Charlie, I might be a tad resentful about that. Just a tad.
I kind of liked Scully doing the autopsy, because Mulder had shouted out beforehand, check for lesions or burns, because telekinetic activity can produce burns and lesions on people. And what do you know, there's a huge one on his chest.
It's something we've seen before, though, with the thing. I think it's in Shadows,
It is Shadows, yeah.
Miracle Man as well, Mulder comments about manipulating electromagnetic fields through psychokinesis.
Yeah.
So it's an idea that at least we are kind of continuing with our themes, that this is a sign of kind of psychic activity.
But again, I think we'd contrast how Scully behaved at the start of Shadows to how she behaves in this episode. Because in Shadow, she's kind of like, oh, cool, let's go look at this weird, unexplainable phenomena. And this one's a case of, Mulder, you're crazy.
I love the kind of little sigh when she does pull back that corpse's shirt, though, and finds the burns. It's like that, oh, he's right. Oh, God.
Well, I think actually, though, we have to jump to the end of the episode, because it's a case of, we're used to Scully does not see. This is Scully's in the room as all the stuff goes off at the same time. Because you've got Michelle standing over Fiora, Fiora begging for his life, claiming she's Charlie, the weird blue light that comes from nowhere, the house starting to fall down around them, and the fish tank exploding.
To be fair, in Mulder's ending narrative, they do file this as unexplained.
Yeah.
But I can just imagine Scully trying to justify this as a power surge or swamp gas or light off the planet Venus or anything else.
And failing to. And in case of, I think it's notable it's not Scully doing the sum up, because it's going to be a case of, yeah, I don't know what I saw in that room. I can't explain it.
A power surge is the best I can do. You know, the lights get really bright and then the fish tank explodes. You've got to assume it's some kind of power surge.
Yeah.
Kind of hope that someone helped the poor fish, though. There's at least one in that tank you see get blown out.
But only one. It's like, all the shots of the fish tank, there's barely anything in it, except for the deep sea diver.
I guess I can tag in here. I did read a kind of fun tidbit about the stunt work in this episode. It's particularly the opening kill where Babala goes flying out of a window.
Oh, I think I vaguely remember reading something about this.
Yeah, the way you do a stunt like that is essentially you just replace the pane of glass that is going to be blown out with sugar glass, you know, so the actor won't get cut when he goes through it. But when they blew the glass so the stunt actor could dive through, it blew out the window next to it. And they couldn't figure a way. I'm not sure how clearly you can see this in the actual episode, that the second glass is missing for no good reason. But one of the producers on set suggested that when they show the view down at the corpse, there should be the Barbala's pet dog lying next to him that couldn't take it and therefore hurled itself out of the other window.
Oh, what? Okay, sure, why not? Who suggested that? Which one of them?
I can't remember, I'm afraid. I read it when I was researching things for this episode. But yeah, if you did notice, as we did not, that the second window is missing, that's why, as Barbala's dog could not take it anymore.
You can tell the X-Files was a bit of a weird show at this point, can't you? I think getting to the whole central cause of the whole plot and everything is the money in the safety deposit box. And I think the problem with this these days is you can't say we've put this money in storage and the last person standing gets it without invoking something like, I don't know, the flying hellfish from The Simpsons, which did the same concept and much, much sillier.
It's possibly a dated reference now. I mean, that episode's got to be like 20 years old by this point.
Well, that episode is 20 years old, so...
Yeah, I suppose so. They must have been like round the kind of same sort of era.
Yeah, but it's just it's very hard to take that kind of notion seriously, and the whole... I don't even get into why they're waiting 10 years for the heat to cool down.
No, I don't think they actually do.
They just are waiting 10 years.
So you know that it's been illicitly gotten, at least.
Yeah. So we've got to imply it was Felder and Barbala who actually killed Charlie.
But they made it look like a triad hit.
Yeah, and drowned him in his own fish tank.
But it noted he was mutilated in a kind of triady sort of chainsaw accident.
Yeah.
But the late evidence that Scully gets about the saltwater inhalation means that he was dead before they mutilated him.
Yeah.
Which presumably differs from if the triad had got him where he would have been mutilated alive, I have to assume.
Yeah. I don't know, it's one of these, again... Well, I think the other part, though, is they drowned him in his fish tank. Okay. Do you see how high up that fish tank was from the floor? Like, you actually have to get a stepladder to sort of hoist him up, to dunk him into the fish tank.
Babala's pretty tall.
He's not that tall. Neither, I don't think Charlie was that tall. That's a huge fish tank they've got.
Maybe it was a different fish tank and she just kept the little deep sea diver figure.
To be honest, I'm getting the impression that the writers love the idea of having the deep sea diver be the image in the video and then had to retroactively justify it.
To be fair, the writers of this episode did note the fact that they realised on writing it that it was a lot like Shadows, but felt they did Shadows better. Yeah, which is probably a fair reading of this episode.
Absolutely. I think Shadows is definitely the superior version of this.
I know as well that both Chris Carter and David Duchovny both had a dislike of this episode, apparently, as well.
Yeah. Mulder comes across as more lunatic than he often does.
After Tombs? Nah.
Well, no, I think it's the whole talking to a psychiatrist about past life stuff is not a good idea. I mean, he's not like the guy at the university, the past life guy, they had in Lazarus.
Should have brought him back.
Yeah, he'd have been all for it, but not this psychiatrist.
Do we start taking bets now on how many more episodes it is before Mulder gets institutionalized?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, really, isn't it? So I just found another note on the origami is the experience to the audience as well. I get that maybe it was a semi-obscure thing at the time, but do you remember what the explanation is for why Charlie does it? Is he was born in Japan?
He was born in Japan, wasn't he?
Okay, so
yeah.
It's a hobby, guys. Anyone can pick it up from anywhere.
Maybe, again, not so much at the time. I know these days you get all sorts of books and origami kits. Maybe you didn't in the early 90s. In America, maybe it was a bit more unusual.
Yeah, I vaguely remember watching it at the time and thinking, why are they telling us what origami is? This is basic stuff.
It's not some obscure Japanese practice
No.
that he's brought with him.
It's one of those things Japan is famous for.
I could understand maybe if you were trying to explain the tea ceremony or something like that.
Yeah.
Something a bit more quintessentially Japanese that you might not have seen before.
Geisha, flower petals, sakura blossoms, all the rest of it. That I can understand.
Calligraphy, if she suddenly started writing in kanji or something like that.
That would be a bit more, that's far more cultural set and much less exported because it's more difficult to do. Yeah, origami is, I think everyone knows what origami is these days. Or possibly, I don't know back then, but it feels weird at this point in time. So a slightly obscure reference for those not in the know about British media, but when the electrical cord attacks Tony Fiora at the end of the episode, it's got that whole dark place feel to it.
The plug kinesis.
The plug kinesis. So Dark Place, for those who don't know, is a spoof comedy horror series by the fictitious author Garth Marenghi, which aired on Channel 4, and is basically an 80s horror sci-fi series, which is basically riffing on Stephen King, Clive Barker, and
with a bit of the kingdom thrown in.
Yeah, and it's all, they're trying to do it as seriously as possible, but they've got no money. The actors are all terrible. They've had to overdub a few people. The special effects are lousy, and the episodes are running up to 10 minutes short, so they have to keep on padding them out.
But Garth Marenghi himself, who narrates a lot of it, thinks that it's high art.
Yeah. But anyway, so this episode inadvertently replicates, I think 5 years before Dark Place actually did it, the kind of goofy special effects that Dark Place would do so well.
I love that bit with the plug as well, especially as there was no real evidence beforehand that Charlie had telekinesis.
No, yeah.
Especially, I guess, other than the guy's scarf getting tangled in the bus.
Or the guy be thrown out the window. So actually, we can say...
Yeah, all right, I take that back. We do have evidence of him being telekinetic, but not to kind of that precise, almost silliness. I mean, it's the difference between kind of delicate art and hitting something with a sledgehammer.
It feels odd that Barbala wasn't finessed, because Felder was finessed on the bus. And Fiora, she's trying to finesse. But Barbala, nope, just punt him out the window with as much force as you can.
I kind of like the locked room mystery aspect of that, of what must the precinct have been thinking when Bala goes flying out that window with some force, and the only person in the room is this diminutive 8-year-old girl.
9-year-old.
9-year-old girl. I apologise.
Because she's conceived at the same time as Charlie dies, which is the whole soul transference thing, and you link that back to Lazarus. But you do raise a good point there, is surely this episode would have been better if it had been designed as a locked room mystery. And you didn't have this whole weird revenge gangland thing going around it.
Just a police officer dies mysteriously in a kind of forceful, violent way, and the only person locked in the room with him was a little girl.
Yeah.
You've got a bit like Eve then, as well, as I noted in Eve, the kind of how these girls were able to lift a man into a seat and things like that.
And dispose of how many pints of blood it was.
You have that evidence of a little girl being stronger than a little girl should be.
Unless Mulder captures them, and then they are exactly as strong as a 9-year-old girl.
Oh, Mulder is just really, really flipping strong.
I think we're going to have to keep an eye out for that. Is Mulder really strong, or are Eves variably strong depending on context?
Or you've got the kind of idea like Bungo Stray Dogs, Desai, Mulder has this power to nullify other people's powers by touching them. So therefore the Eves lost all of their strength because Mulder, unbeknownst to us, has this ability just to nullify powers.
Despite the fact you're using Eve for this, I have a better suggestion.
Oh yeah?
It's actually Scully has that power. That's why she doesn't experience anything. Because she's walking around blotting out the paranormal all around in this wide variance.
So it's like a kind of field version of Desai's power.
Yeah, so she just that's why she walks into place and sees nothing. Oh, it's nothing. It's complete coincidence more than she's just exuding an energy field that's preventing the paranormal.
Yes, I accept that as canon. That is now canon. No one can convince me otherwise.
Except for that part where she saw the blue light and the fish tank exploding and...
The power surge,
the power
Nick.
surge, I'm sorry, okay. But it is an interesting one of, we're so used to Scully never gets to see anything, and this one, she was right there for a change.
The code I use for that when I'm taking notes on these episodes is Scully did not see, and I think every episode so far I've written Scully did not see at one point in my notes.
Except this one. And it's just baffling that this is the exception. But yeah, getting to the ending, as I think we've touched on a few times, it's still... Michelle is now fine, she can now swim, which is the evidence she's no longer possessed by Charlie Morris.
She's not possessed by him, she is him.
So she's no...
So
she's
let's say Charlie has passed on to the... great origami farm in the fat sky.
So surely that should then mean Michelle is like an empty vessel who has to start from first concepts again to rebuild her entire persona.
So you're going with tabula rasa as everything that made up Michelle was Charlie, so now she's the blank slate.
Yeah, because they make all the mentions of she's not like other girls, she very rarely smiles, she has no friends.
I relate with her intensely.
You know what I mean, though. She doesn't have... She has these weird interests in origami and everything.
You presume that she wouldn't be entirely the blank slate, though. She must have things that she's learnt over 9 years of life. She wouldn't just be left the empty shell.
Well, yeah, it's the whole... Again, it would have... It feels cleaner if it had been possession.
You've got the difference between memory and learned experience.
Yeah.
Is, when people have accidents and maybe lose their short-term memory, they don't lose things that they've learnt on rote and things like that. So, it's two different storage centres, isn't it?
That's true. Do you have anything else on this
Let me just check
episode?
my notes. Okay, yeah, I got something.
Okay, shoot.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember people's names in this episode. Charlie's former wife and Fiore's current wife. Anita. We don't get any focus on Anita. Anita, once again, and it's a critique I've raised on things like Miracle Man and other ones before, is we've got this female character that's kind of royally shafted, who has a really sad side story that doesn't get any resolution.
No, and the best we've got for the end of this is she's going to divorce Fiore pretty quickly, given his involvement in Charlie's death. But yeah, that's about her extent of her involvement.
We already mentioned the fact that reincarnated Charlie doesn't even look at her over the course of this episode. She has had 9 years to come to terms with Charlie's death, only to have all that shaken because she's discovered that her current husband is not only his killer, but has comforted her and married her knowing that he is the killer since then, because his rationale, I think, at the end was, where is it? I just wanted to take care of you.
Yeah.
And it's tragic, and we've destroyed this woman, we've destroyed her life, we've shaken her trust in anyone. And we don't focus on this at all in the end. I don't want to make a generalisation, but our writers in this series so far have been male.
Yes, except for
one,
Shapes.
I think. Shapes is the only one that's woman. And we have written our female characters abysmally.
Yes, with the exception of Scully, mostly.
To a degree, it's taken them a bit to get the hang of Scully, I think. Yeah. But yeah, we are starting to get Scully's character developing now, particularly Beyond the Sea is magnificent.
Yeah. But yes, again... like Miracle Man, it feels like Anita should be the central point of the episode rather than this outlying aspect again. Either you have that locked room mystery or you focus it around Anita. And you could even just have it, though, Charlie didn't come home one night. And then she says it's happening again with Tony. It's like, there's your whole, this is why she's gone to people to say.
She did say that halfway through the episode.
So this is your whole, how she sort of sparks off the whole incident. And then Mordred's going to get pulled in via that somehow.
Yeah, I do think that's better. Again, this is probably why I'd say Shadows is the superior version of this episode, is at least you're focusing on how it affects the female character in that, who is central to it.
Yes.
And we have the kind of idea that in a lot of the episodes where we've got this sad female character outlying, I think the worst is still Miracle Man with the detective's wife.
Yeah.
Is you've got this character who has a sad plot that just ends with them being miserable. And there's no annoyance there, no kind of development, no light at the end of the tunnel. You've just left this female character destroyed in the sidelines and not focused on it.
Yep, and just miserable forever.
Yeah, good going, good writing. I'd like to get some more female writers in, though. That please more female writers.
I think it's one of the ongoing problems with the X-Files is they They probably do have some more, but not as much as you'd think or like. I think they're actually very, very sparse.
Disappointing when 50% of your main characters are female.
American TV, unfortunately.
Especially in the 90s, I suppose.
Especially in the 90s. Yeah, this is all very typical. Anything further on this one, or shall we move on to Roland?
No, that was my rant.
Roland, then, was first broadcast on the 6th of May 1994, directed by David Nutter and written by Chris Rupenthal, who is the first episode he's written.
Okay.
Guest stars, and I'm hoping I'm pronounced this correctly, I wrote down the phonetic version, it's Zelko Ivanik, who played Roland and Arthur... I've forgotten the surname.
Roland Fuller and Arthur Grable.
Who, other things we've seen him in, he is in True Blood, because he's head vampire.
Yep.
He's also in X-Men Apocalypse. Poor man.
Oh, who is he in X-Men?
He's a Pentagon scientist. He's no one of note.
Aw.
But he's in Frasier.
Oh, who's he in Frasier?
Dr. Arnold Shaw. I don't remember who that is, but he's in there.
Aw.
Also, guest starring is Mikel Mercurio, who played Mrs. Stodie, who is the proprietor of the halfway house.
Yeah.
I don't think I actually call her by name in the whole episode.
Okay, I know who you mean.
Yeah. She was in Gleaming the Cube, the infamous Christian Slater skateboard film. I'll have to show it at some point. It is terrible.
I think you've mentioned it before,
I have. Okay, so there's also Kerry Sadamirski, who played Tracy. She will turn up in The X-Files again in Too Shy as Joanne.
Oh, I can picture her.
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah.
Yep. We also have Gary Davey, who played Dr. Keats, who was in Eve as Hunter. I don't, for the life of me, remember who that was.
I'm going to assume like the truck driver, maybe, or something like that.
Maybe. But he'll also show up in Endgame as the captain. That's the two-part one with Colony.
Okay, yep.
And Sister G as Bob Spitz in Season 4. We've also got James Sloyan as Dr. Frank Nillette, who, as you found out, was in Xanadu as Simpson. He's been in Star Trek Next Generation twice, Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And lastly, we have Matthew Walker as Dr. Ronald Cernow, who, and I'm going to struggle with this one, is in Season 4, Gethsemane, as Arlinsky.
Okay.
He's the scientist who finds the body in the glacier.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's him. He's also in Ginger Snaps Back to the Beginning as Doc Murphy.
Oh, yeah.
He's in Alone in the Dark, which is what we should remember him for.
Yes, he is,
He is. He's the mad scientist.
Yeah.
He was also in The Wicker Man, the Nicolas Cage version,
Okay.
as the seaplane pilot who shows up at like the start of the film.
Yeah.
And Series of Unfortunate Events as a ticket seller.
Oh, you got some good ones for him.
Yeah, I
Given that he's in this episode for 4 seconds.
I was quite pleased with him. Let me get to my section.
I'll give you my trivia for this now. Is that Dr. Keats, you notice being in several episodes as well, is also a teacher at the William B. Davis School for Acting, which was something I discovered existed through researching this episode.
And this would be the William B. Davis we think of.
It is indeed the William B. Davis. He's actually been teaching acting in England and Canada for 50 years now.
Wow.
And still does lecture on the subject.
Yeah, I knew he was a teacher. It was mentioned somewhere. I think it's when he went in for the audition for pilot. Because again, he auditioned for the other guy in the room, not Blevins, the other guy.
Yeah.
And didn't get it.
It's the William B. Davis Academy, if you look it up online, though, is fascinating because it's got alumnus including people like Lucy Lawless and Donald Sutherland on there.
It's pretty cool.
It's really actually well regarded, and I shouldn't be surprised about that because William B. Davis is great, but it's kind of neat that he's got this whole teaching academy that's been going on since before the X-Files and continued to present day.
It's just the image of being taught by a cigarette smoking man. I mean, it's much like being lectured by Tolkien, of which, of course, Diane Wynne-Jones was lectured by Tolkien, who was trying to stop her being lectured by him so he could go and write Lord of the Rings at the time.
I also discovered on reading about William B. Davis's teaching is he also regularly gives lectures on skepticism, which is part of a response of people repeatedly questioning him, as being the cancer man of his belief in aliens and stuff. And this is his way of definitively saying, no, I don't believe in them.
Poor man. Anyway, would you like to give a synopsis for Roland?
Certainly. In our cold open for this episode, we begin at a physics research lab in Washington. We meet a janitor, Roland Fuller, who is intellectually disabled, He's scolded by one of the scientists there, Dr. Keats, because he can't even remember the access code that he has to get into a room to clean it. We see the 3 scientists involved in this episode, Keats, Nolette, and Sunao, arguing over a prototype jet engine they have built. Their goal is to crack Mach 15, which they have not yet succeeded in doing. Keats and Nolette eventually leave, leaving Cerno kind of still researching this jet engine. He enters this wind tunnel that's hooked up to the big turbine. While he's in there, Roland locks him in and activates the tunnel's turbines, which kills him. We then see Roland examining the whiteboard on the wall and changing some of the mathematical formulae that the scientists have left there. Mulder and Scully are called in to investigate Sono's mysterious apparent locked room death. Scully quickly learns that there was a 4th scientist originally involved in this research whose name was Arthur Grable. He died in a car accident several months earlier. Mulder, in particular, initially suspects some kind of industrial espionage, but over the course of the episode it becomes apparent that there was no sense that the car was necessarily tampered with. It was just a freak accident. Mulder sees the formulae on the whiteboard and notices that it's been written by at least 4 different people, which doesn't make sense because of the 3 scientists. Mulder is advised that the only other person present in the room that could have been the 4th person was Roland, but when Mulder and Scully visit Roland at his care home, they see the fact that although he has a kind of unusual savant skill for memorizing numbers, he otherwise would not be capable of doing the complicated mathematics that we've seen in the lab. In the time at the care home, we also see how Roland interacts with people around him. In particular, there is a young woman there, Tracy, who he has a rather sweet relationship with, although Roland is clearly troubled and does have these kind of uncharacterful fits of violence. Ruling out Roland as having any involvement in this case whatsoever, we later do see Roland once again doing his janitorial work at the lab. This time it is Dr. Keats who's there alone, and Roland attacks him and kills him, submerging his head in a vat of liquid nitrogen before shattering it against the floor. When investigating this the next day, Mulder and Scully notice that the computer was used for 5 hours at least after Keats's death. The password that they used to access this and find out was one that was attached to Arthur Grable's account, but Mulder obtained this by jotting down the numbers that he saw Roland writing on a notepad the previous day. Investigating Grable's death further, they discovered that Grable was actually the one who hired Roland. They initially now suspect that Grable might have faked his death and that he's kind of using Roland as some sort of patsy so he can get revenge for whatever reason on the other 3 scientists. They discover that Grable's body was never actually brought to the morgue, which seems to suggest this. However, Nolette reveals the fact that indeed Arthur certainly was killed. His head was delivered on his request to a cryogenetic facility and is still being stored there. Through researching Grable's files further, they note that he only has one potential donor, the idea being in the future Arthur's body could be cloned for him and his head therefore reattached. The only donor noted is Roland, and through this they figure out the fact that Roland and Arthur are identical twins. Whereas Roland was born with intellectual disabilities, Arthur was born an absolute mathematical genius, therefore leading Scully to theorise the fact that it was some kind of genetic quirk in the womb, and therefore they kind of wound up as opposite sides of the same coin. Later that night, Nolette sneaks back into the cryogenetic facility and sabotages Grable's unit, slowly thawing out his remains. Roland returns to the lab and starts to push the prototype engine to Mach 15 when Nolette enters and attacks him. Nolette's plan is, having figured out exactly that Arthur is the one possessing Roland, he will kill Roland and make it look like it was self-defense to remove the problem. However, Nolette gets distracted by Grable's work when he realises it is approaching Mach 15, and while distracted, Roland attacks him and drags him into the wind tunnel, planning to kill him in the same way he killed Cerno. Mulder and Scully arrive just in time to kind of prevent this. The rising temperatures at the unit at this moment kill Grable, and therefore Roland is freed from his control. However, this leads to a tense moment when Roland no longer has the skills to shut the unit down, fortunately managing to do so in part by chance at the last minute. At the end of the episode, Roland is taken from the care home to a psychiatric institute for testing. Mulder does recommend, however, that once testing is done, he's returned to the care home. Mulder knows the fact that Roland is not actually culpable and probably won't be arrested or charged because he's just not capable of committing this crime. However, as he leaves, Mulder notices the fact that Roland is brushing his hair to the opposite side in the style that his brother previously wore it, suggesting that Grable is still in control of Roland's body.
Thank you. A surprisingly kind of dark, depressing, and deeply sad episode, all things considered.
I will go, other than potentially Beyond the Sea, this is certainly the saddest episode of the series so far. It is really quite bleak.
Yeah, and it's probably why we have a few moments of very weird levity, like the offhand comment that Scully has been to a wedding, which has no purpose at all, and it's just kind of mentioned in the opening few minutes.
Yeah.
And she might have caught the bouquet, and that's that, done with.
Yeah, that's our brevity for the episode done. On we go.
I think, as well, you also made the point, though, that traditionally, when you have someone sucked into a jet engine or a big fan like that, there's a blood splatter that comes afterwards to demonstrate that they are, in fact, very dead. And this episode does not have a blood splatter. And in fact, they've cleaned up the blood so well, it's completely gone by the time Mulder and Scully get there.
Yeah, I'm no expert, but big mincing blades, I imagine, make quite a lot of mess.
Yeah, I think it's a ratings or budget problem of why that wasn't depicted.
Do you want my trivia about Mach speeds? Because I've been researching this.
I would.
I was curious what Mach 15 actually meant and how possible it actually was.
I know it's way past plausible, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to go on absolute basic level here because I didn't know this. Do you know what Mach is?
It is a measure of speed, but more than that, I don't know.
Yes, Mach 1 is the speed of sound.
Oh, okay.
So every time you go up, so Mach
Jesus.
2 will be twice the speed of sound.
Yeah.
So the Mach 15 they are aiming for is 15 times the speed of sound. For our science, Mach 15, which is what they're aiming for this episode, would be 11,509.037 miles per hour.
Jesus.
Yep. So, in realistic terms, the fastest a manned plane has gone in the atmosphere is Mach 9.64. And Mach 10 is theoretically possible, but currently has only been achieved in atmosphere by an unmanned craft. They haven't made it safe for a person to travel that way.
So in 30 years, they haven't got to Mach 10, let alone Mach 15.
Yep. So we're going quite above what is actually physically possible.
I mean, yeah, you've got to be getting into, like, turbulence and sort of aerodynamics at that point, and whether the vehicle can actually move through the air without sort of just...
Well, they do state in the episode that the Icarus project, I think they call it, is
Yeah.
their goal is to double supersonic speed on half the fuel, which I don't know why, therefore, they want to get to Mach 15, because if you're doubling supersonic speed, you'd be going for Mach 2 on half the fuel.
Yeah. I was also going to make a point as well, just listening to your synopsis again, is we've kind of fallen guilty into the whole scientists are good at all science idea again.
Yeah.
Because it's the whole, I've forgotten his name. Whoever the guy who tries to kill Arthur.
At the very end.
Yeah.
Nolette.
So he breaks into the cryogenics place using his silver foil on a key card.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure if that works, but then tampers with the thermostat. But apparently tampers it in such a way that the cryogenic experts who run this place can't fix it, remove the thermostat, do anything to it.
We do know he's an engineer.
We know he's an engineer.
But at the same time, you'd like to think that the people running the cryogenics facility know how to maintain their equipment.
Yes. And I imagine the get-out clause is that they are using liquid nitrogen in the jet propulsion laboratory. Not sure what for, because they have a tank of liquid nitrogen, and you don't think about it normally, and then you go, wait, why is that there?
I don't know enough about engineering. Perhaps there is something you'd need it for coolant for or something.
Possibly, but not in your control room. You put it back over where the
It would
engine is.
be whoever's kind of maintaining the machinery would have it, not your random mathematicians in the office.
Just so we can freeze someone's face off. Do you want to get into the liquid nitrogen rant?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yep.
I have done intensive research into liquid nitrogen because I was prepared to be wrong about this, but I timed 10 seconds. That guy's head was submerged in the episode. Not his entire head, just his face pressed into it. In that time, not only did it appear that he'd either drowned or suffocated, but he'd also, it was enough for his face to freeze so thoroughly that Roland could shatter it.
Yep.
Research time.
Okay.
Liquid nitrogen is only really dangerous if inhaled. If it forms a gas, it's incredibly dangerous because it can expand within your lungs.
Yeah.
I read case studies where it said people had tried to do party tricks, blowing smoke rings was one of the more ridiculous ones I read.
Yeah.
So he put it in his mouth, he accidentally inhaled it, it expanded, collapsing his lungs and destroying most of his intestinal tract. Though he survived, this guy, it should be noted as well.
Okay.
Just severely, severely injured. To actually freeze this, because people have tried to prove for insurance claims that you cannot actually freeze this, as there have been cases legally where people have claimed that liquid nitrogen has caused them to, their limbs to shatter or whatever, for insurance claims. So what can, indeed does happen usually, is if you were to submerge something for 40 seconds, it would freeze all the way through 40, not 10 like the episode.
Yep.
It would not shatter. Indeed, it's been proven with freezing larger carcasses like turkeys, so I don't know where Scully's example of a fish in there, that if you dropped it, it would still bounce.
Okay.
It is just frozen solid all the way through. What would happen is when you defrosted something at that temperature, the limb probably would not survive.
Yeah.
So it would need to be surgically removed because it would probably contract gangrene, the same as it would if you got severe frostbite.
Yeah. Cell rupture.
So yes, in conclusion, you cannot flash freeze someone's face and shatter it against the floor. I'm really sorry to disillusion everyone, as I know this happens in sci-fi all the time.
Yeah. I blame James Cameron.
Alien?
Terminator 2.
Ah, yeah.
Which was 1992, so would have been fresh in everyone's mind.
Well, I was thinking Alien Resurrection you have a good liquid nitrogen scene in as well.
True, that's 2 years hence.
Ah, true,
that's
true.
96.
So that's the problem persisting after Roland.
Oh, I think it's because
it is a kind of dramatic, gory death. It's very nasty. Even though in Roland you don't see anything, it's still that chalk outline with all the fragments surrounding the head.
Yeah.
It's phenomenally, phenomenally nasty way to die that wouldn't actually happen.
But again, is even though chalk outline is, in terms of police procedural stuff, is something you don't do anymore unless you have to move the body before you're taking the pictures.
I guess because you have the technology to develop photos instantly now.
Yeah, so it's the chalk outline is great for illustrative purposes, presumably again to get around the problem of we can't show gore on TV, but does make sense. I
presume it would make sense in the case of this episode, though, thinking it through in the Dexter ballistic style, is if anyone moved any of those little fragments, it's a lot easier just to draw where they all are on the floor.
It's true. Arthur has the worst password, though, for a genius.
15626.
Yeah. So that's only one number more than a PIN number, which is already notoriously bad for security purposes. This is his life's work that he jealously guards from everyone else.
I'd go with a 5-digit number as more secure than some people's passwords I know.
Well, obviously there is that too. I think you touched on in the summary as well, and it is interesting that we've got the complete red herring of Arthur's death. The episode does set it up like it's going to have been murder.
You feel logically it's the chain of Arthur's motivation would make more sense if he'd been murdered.
Yeah, and it turns out, no, he's just a jerk.
I'm going to go, I've been thinking about this more and more since you said it while we were watching the episode, is that Arthur is a scientist, so you'd think he'd want people to continue his work. Surely the kind of having this knowledge come into the world would be the important thing.
Absolutely.
You're dead, you can't do it anymore. Someone has gone on and taken your work to reach Mach 15.
Yeah.
The fact that other people are using his work without crediting him and he's trying to murder the lot of them, therefore Mach 15 will never be reached.
Well, and also then complete the work as his brother, who no one knows about, who, let us be noted, he tends to use for spare parts. Because, I know you thought the donor thing for the future, but we don't know he isn't actually advocating cutting Roland's head off and having his one grafted onto the stump.
I thought it was more, they said cloning. So
they did say cloning.
It's not the fact that he's going to sacrifice Roland, but it does kind of show his objectification of Roland.
Yeah.
I read Glenn Morgan's commentary on this episode where he said that he thought this was a softer, less horrifying thing. But I think this body horror is terrifying. It's like Roland has a low IQ. He's evidently disabled. He can't function by himself in the world. And he has this brother, the person who should be looking out for him, who essentially views him as a vessel. He has no problem possessing, presumably by the ending hint, permanently as well, Roland's body. So he has such little regard for his own brother's agency that he would possess him and take control of his body. It's just horrifying. It's terrifying.
Absolutely.
It's the scariest way that we can turn the brain in the vat into something threatening.
Which is not what we usually get. Side note here, of course, is that cryogenics is kind of a fraud, sadly.
We'll never get our brain in the vat?
We'll never get... Well, you can have your brain in the vat, that's fine. It's doing anything with it afterwards is the problem.
We philosophers love an argument called the brain in the vat, which was coined by Pullman, but it's the whole idea of, you can take a person's brain, like the Matrix, put it in a vat, hook it up to some kind of machine that will be feeding it what it believes is reality, and, how that would differentiate from what is real. The brain in the vat's experiencing everything, it believes it's real, so how is that different from it actually being real?
Yeah.
But you have just filled me with the immense sadness that the brain in the vat is not possible.
Well,
I cannot
not like
be
that.
a brain in a mad scientist laboratory after all. This is all real. Painfully, painfully real.
Though, if you're going to get into simulation theory in terms of the simulated universe, you don't know how the laws of reality are on the outside of the universe if this was simulated.
That would be phenomenalism in philosophy. It's the idea that you have no way of proving that when you leave a room, it doesn't cease to exist behind you.
There we go. So, you don't give up hope just yet. You might be a
I can still be a brain in the vat.
You can still be a brain in the vat. A common refrain on this is Mulder is good with people, bad at social situations. And in this episode, we get an oddity, because Mulder's really good with Roland for 99% of the episode. Because he talks to him, he treats him completely normally. He makes small talk. He talks to him, it's sort of just regular conversations with him.
There's a wonderful scene where he's playing with a toy spaceship with Roland and explaining to Roland how Arthur is controlling him in terms of, the same way that Roland is controlling the spaceship, which is, a great, almost like talking to a child, explaining in a way that Roland will be able to comprehend it.
Yeah. I also like when he gets the shirt out the wardrobe and says, how about this shirt? And he says, no, the green one's better. And just puts it back and takes the green one out and sort of just does it.
Yeah.
And that's lovely. Until the end of the episode, though, where Nalette is trapped in the wind turbine and Mulder's shouting at Arthur to turn the machine off, Scully steps in and says, Roland, please turn the machine off.
This is what I wanted to comment on earlier when we were talking about Born Again, is the idea is Mulder is great in interrogation. Yeah. He knows how to speak to people one-on-one. He can get the answers he wants. He's very good at relating with people. In a crisis, Mulder panics.
Yes.
Mulder panics, Mulder shouts, Mulder can't get through, whereas Scully retains this cool head. It's Scully's clinical detachment, essentially. Scully is not great at dealing with people. Much like she does in Pilot, there's a bit in this where she kind of refers to Roland as being a vegetable too, which is similar to how she was kind of talked down to the kid in the coma in Pilot.
That was Billy Miles, wasn't it?
Billy Miles, yeah. In a crisis, Scully can get through to people. Scully can keep her head, which is kind of what you want to see in a doctor.
Yes. And I suppose it makes sense from Scully's belief system, really, that she's going to call Roland, because she's not buying any of this Arthur's taking control of his body crap.
Or, on another note, is even if Scully believed that, Scully can see that Arthur has left now as well. Is that's why Roland can't shut down the machine, because Arthur's the one who turned it on. Roland doesn't know how to turn it off.
Yeah, and that's the whole... I think that undermines the sting at the end a little bit. Because the whole, as you said, there's the implication because he's brushing his hair the opposite direction. And that's great as an ambiguous point to end on, but the episode quite clearly set up that Arthur died because his container got too warm.
I feel you've also got the hairbrushing is the obvious bit, but the actor who plays Roland, I'm afraid I can't remember his name, but he's fantastic.
He's very good. Yes.
When Arthur is in control, he holds himself in an entirely different way. So you can tell at a glance, looking at him, if that is Roland or if that is Arthur.
Yeah, I like the tiny detail as well that he's ambidextrous.
But also the idea that Roland might be one-handedness, whereas Arthur is the other.
Yeah.
Because the handwriting does not match, of course, as well.
But then, in fact, he's writing two sets of notes at the same time, which is quite impressive.
But again, he's two brains in one body, too.
He is, so that won't be how he's doing it, but...
All the anecdotes we hear about Arthur from when he was alive are kind of oddly charming, like the one with him dismantling a teacher's car inside his... and rebuilding it inside the teacher's office.
Yes.
These kind of pranky things, but... The Arthur that we see in the episode is wholeheartedly nasty.
A cold-blooded bastard, yeah.
It's not even just when he's attacking these scientists who he has a reason to. There is even a bit in the episode where he kind of shows Roland flashes of him attacking Tracy.
Yeah.
Which, lucky, Roland has enough control to kind of lock himself away and not harm Tracy. But it's like it's not only his disregard for Roland, he seems to enjoy making Roland suffer as well.
Yeah, it's like Arthur's... terrible person, apparently.
He's possibly one of the more evil people we've encountered in the X-Files so far. I mean, we've seen a couple of serial killer characters like Luther Lee Boggs and Toombs, but none of them kind of revel in suffering like Arthur seems to.
No, I mean, he always despite the prank stuff, he looked even dour in that photo of them when they've reassembled the car with his amazing fake beard.
Oh, the hilariously fake beard is brilliant, really.
They really struggled to hide it was him.
I guess he's got quite distinct bone structure, the guy who plays Roland. He's got quite an angular face and stuff. Maybe without the beard, it was too obvious.
Possibly.
They get that poor, long-suffering photo fit technician back in. And they do the photo fit, and it's exact. Yeah. He said, he's got receding widow's peak, and that's Roland's hair straight there.
I think it's contrasted to Born Again. It's a good episode. It's a very dark, very depressing, very sad episode, but it's kind of the X-Files at one of its stronger points for the season.
I like this episode. I think this is a really, really sound episode. Based on what I read in the critical response to it, I think it's a bit underrated as well, to be honest. It's a very powerful episode. It's very moving. It's very memorable. It does have a few weaknesses in terms of plot, but on the whole, it's kind of... We've refined this sort of possession, soul transference idea that we've had through the likes of Born Again, Shadows, Lazarus. This is our kind of refined, more solid idea of this episode. It's kind of a shame that we've had 3 other episodes that are a bit similar in this season. When we mentioned earlier about Mulder relating with Roland, there's a bit where he asks Roland about dreams, and he recounts a dream he has recently had himself.
Yes.
Which I will say now is kind of interesting because I had a look at the original script for this episode, and originally the dream was supposed to be about Samantha.
Oh, okay.
However, in the final scripted version of the episode, it's changed to his father, Where Mulder mentions it's a dream where he's kind of swimming and he can see his father through the water and loses sight of him, and that there's another bad person in the area that he can't see but he feels uncomfortable about and things like that, which feels like a kind of... It would fit Samantha very well, but I wondered what the kind of significance will be if it's something we see going forward of why they changed it to the father. It's even in the fact that it was originally supposed to be Samantha fits with Roland better because he'd be talking about seeing his sibling. I'm not sure if it was Mulder ad-libbing, because Mulder is very good at lying off the cuff like this to relate with people.
If it's a genuine dream.
Or if it's a genuine dream and it's intended to be foreshadowing, it'll be interesting how this idea plays out of... Mulder's dad and the bad unseen man. You wouldn't change it from Samantha unless it was a conscious effort. So it's something they wanted you to think about.
Do you have anything else for this episode?
Following on from my prior complaints about being unable to write female characters, credit where credit's due, Tracy is excellent.
She's a very good performance, very believable as this person who has a very simple dream and want in life. And difficulty expressing it.
Again, we have the sad ending, though with a slight upbeat hope of the fact that Mulder has requested that Roland be brought back, so Roland and Tracy might not be separated for long. Yeah,
we'll also have to bank very heavily that it is Roland in there. He's just decided to change his hairstyle. That's just really kind of hammer home that, it's still Roland.
But it's how sweet it is with Tracy's dream to be married and live in a house with Roland, which we know will never happen, but... It's that sweet, pure friendship that they have.
Oh, yeah.
And even ending at the end of the episode is when they're separated and Tracy can't understand why Roland's going, he gives his kind of treasured thing of a little jam jar full of sticky stars to her as a present, and they both say, I love you. And it's the absolute heart-wrenching finale of the episode, but it's so sweet, it's so well-meaning, and for once it's not just a female character left with no closure and sadness.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to hope that... Roland gets released.
You've got hope for Tracy. She'll get Roland back. She'll be happy. She'll bounce back.
They might not get out of their own house, but they can live together in that halfway house.
Which is a really nice little care home.
It is. I mean, it's very easy to miss. There are other people in there. It's not just the two of them. There's one other person.
There's at least one other person you see in the background.
But that's the only other person we see in there.
But the lady who looks after them seems really pleasant. There's no sinisterness about that care home. It is a lovely little place.
Yeah, you're very used to the whole staff being cruel or controlling or something, but no, she seems genuinely appreciative and caring.
Well, and she's genuinely very upset with the fact that Roland has turned out to be capable of violence, the fact that she's never picked this up and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows the level of trustiness is the fact that Roland can evidently easily get out at night.
Yes.
With no one noticing and no one stopping him.
Yeah. And it's one of these whole... I don't know if it's things they should have picked up on, like things like Arthur coming to the care home and specifically hiring Roland, not sending off red flags of why?
Mm.
Why do you look like Roland wearing a really bad beard?
I guess maybe you've got philanthropy. You know,
Oh yeah, there are explanations for it. I mean, I think ultimately it's got to come down to the mother was just unable to care for Roland in the capacity he needed for some reason. But we don't get a lot of why the split happened.
A more common thing back then is if you had, like, we don't know what Roland's condition is or something, but something like if you have a child who's profoundly autistic, they were often just sent away to care homes and stuff like that because parents didn't have the resources to care for them. Again,
though, it does show how Arthur apparently has become cruel over time because there's every suggestion that he and Roland were really close as children.
They were very young in that flashback.
But given how distressed Roland was at Arthur being taken away, and Arthur is also struggling in that flashback. It's not... I know, there's a lot of years to grow up in between, but it's just Roland's trajectory as a person versus Arthur's trajectory as a person.
I would like to comment. And the other thing I'm not sure about is how stereotypy Roland's portrayal is, particularly now, is you have a lot of your kind of Rainman-style stereotypical view of what savantism is.
Yeah, it's getting into a sticky situation where at the time this would have been a matter of course. These days you would really try not to have an able-bodied person do this.
Back in the day, not only would it always be an able-bodied person as it is here, but you had your idea of if someone is autistic, they have a savant skill.
Yeah.
Which, of course, now we know that autism is a scale and savantism is incredibly rare.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure by modern times, because I don't have the knowledge or the kind of area of experience to be able to judge this of how much of a stereotype Roland would be considered to be.
Yeah, it's very typical early 90s TV stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something that they'll escape from either, because we've got House as kind of like more the Arthur end of the spectrum later.
Yeah.
In a number of years' time.
It's the two ways you do it, really, is you either have the Sherlock kind of character where they're an absolute photographic memory genius who has no social skills whatsoever.
Yeah.
Or you have the person who is unable to care for themselves and is very childlike, but has one usually mathematical skill that they are absolutely genius at.
There's one middle ground I can point you to.
Oh, yeah.
Abed
in Community, yeah. He's probably a middle ground, though they're always very careful to not say that Abed is autistic.
And then he does also make fun of the autistic character trope in one episode.
Yeah. They're always very, very careful not to kind of try and diagnose Abed in the episodes.
Do you have anything else?
No, that was the last point I wanted to make.
Okay. If you'd like to contact us for any reason, our email address is thingsaregettingstrange42@gmail.com.
Or you can bother me over on our social media. On Twitter and Tumblr, it is @getstrange42. On Mastodon, it's @getstrange42@universadon.com. And on Facebook, you can find us just by searching for Things Are Getting Strange and X-Files Rewatch Podcast. As I said earlier in the episode, please do chip in on our debates for next week's podcast. I'm going to be asking a couple of questions through the week because I want to know what your opinions were on the first season. Just because after we've discussed the Ellen Mayer Flask, we will get into our overall opinions of Season 1.
Yep, week after we'll be on to 2 episodes of Season 2. Our theme music is Envisioned by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on incompetech.com, licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Thank you all for listening, and until next week, the truth is out there.